The city of Edinburgh, famous for its cobblestone streets, historic castles, and bustling tourist areas, held a side that few outsiders ever saw. Beneath the charm of the old town and the beauty of the Royal Mile, a network of criminal activity thrived in quiet neighborhoods and narrow alleys. It was in these hidden corners that Callum MacLeod first began carving out his name. Born into a rough part of the city, Callum grew up surrounded by poverty, broken families, and limited opportunities. He was a product of his environment, learning early that only the cunning, bold, and ruthless could survive. From a young age, Callum exhibited a fearless nature. While other kids his age were wary of confrontation, he moved through the streets with confidence, unafraid of authority or rival peers. His charisma drew others toward him, and slowly a group of like-minded young men formed around him. At first, their activities were small, protecting local shops, intimidating bullies, and asserting their presence in the neighborhood. But even these minor acts began to build a reputation. Whispers of Callum's boldness and the loyalty he inspired spread quickly, creating both admiration and fear among residents and rivals alike. The streets of Edinburgh provided the perfect training ground for Callum. He learned to read people, understand threats before they emerged, and use the city's landscape to his advantage. Narrow alleys, hidden corners, and quiet streets became strategic points for observing rivals or launching intimidation tactics. The older gang members noticed his skill, and soon he began taking on small leadership roles within local crews. His intelligence and daring approach allowed him to rise faster than many expected. By the time he reached his late teens, Callum was no longer just another street kid. He was a force to be reckoned with, a young man whose ambition was matched only by his willingness to take risks. As his reputation grew, so did the complexity of his operations. Callum began exploring ways to gain more influence over the neighborhood. He used fear and respect in equal measure, carefully balancing the two to consolidate power. Minor confrontations with rival groups turned into deliberate strategies to assert dominance. Callum understood that strength alone was not enough. Perception mattered. The way others viewed him, confident, untouchable, and fearless, was just as important as the reality of his power. The early days of Callum's rise were marked by small victories that laid the foundation for something much larger. Each act of intimidation, every minor heist or skirmish, added layers to his growing influence. People began to realize that the quiet neighborhoods of Edinburgh were no longer safe, and that a new presence had taken control of the streets. For Callum and his crew, this was just the beginning. The sense of invincibility that came with early success fueled ambition, but it also planted the seeds of overconfidence, a factor that would later prove to be as dangerous as any rival gang. By the end of this early period, Callum MacLeod had established himself as a rising figure in Edinburgh's criminal underworld. His boldness, intelligence, and ability to command loyalty marked him as someone destined for both power and conflict. The streets of the city had taken notice, and the groundwork for his empire had been laid. Yet beneath the surface, danger was already brewing. The same audacity that drove Callum to prominence also made him vulnerable, and the choices he would make in the coming years would determine whether he rose to unstoppable power or faced a violent and inevitable fall. Callum MacLeod's rise in Edinburgh did not happen by chance. His early successes had built a reputation, but he knew that fear alone could not secure lasting power. Ambition drove him to expand his influence, and he began targeting more organized criminal opportunities. Small-time thefts and minor street fights evolved into larger schemes, including protection rackets, illegal gambling operations, and eventually, the drug trade. Each new venture was carefully calculated to maximize profit and assert dominance over rivals. Callum understood that control of territory meant control of opportunity, and he worked relentlessly to ensure his gang held the most strategic locations in the city. Social media became one of Callum's most powerful tools. What had started as casual posts of him and his friends quickly turned into a curated display of power and influence. Images of expensive watches, fast cars, and weapons were posted online, often tagged with locations or subtle messages to rivals. These posts were not just for show. They were psychological warfare. Rivals could see his growing wealth and confidence, while his crew became more loyal, impressed by the image of invincibility that Callum projected. In the modern age of crime, visibility was as crucial as action, and Callum learned to use it to his advantage. As the gang's operations expanded, so did the risks. Competitors in Edinburgh's Underworld were quick to respond, attempting to challenge Callum's authority through intimidation and attacks. Each confrontation forced him to adapt, learning new strategies for both defense and defense. His team was carefully organized, with each member assigned roles based on skill, loyalty, and reliability. Callum himself became the mastermind, orchestrating operations while maintaining an image of fearlessness on the streets. Yet, the closer he got to power, the more enemies he created, both inside and outside the gang. Despite the growing threats, the money and influence fueled a sense of invincibility. The gang began to operate with increasing boldness, holding territory openly and striking with efficiency against anyone who challenged them. Local authorities took notice, but arrests were difficult due to the gang's secrecy, the loyalty of witnesses, and the careful planning behind each operation. Callum understood that law enforcement could be delayed or misled, and he used that to expand his empire faster than anyone could anticipate. However, the gang's growth brought internal pressures as well. Members began to clash over territory, profits, and leadership roles. The loyalty that had once been unquestioned became fragile under the weight of ambition and greed. Callum worked to maintain order through a combination of rewards, intimidation, and selective punishment, ensuring that only those fully committed to his vision remained. Even small mistakes were dealt with harshly to prevent any cracks in control from forming. By the end of this stage, Callum Cutter MacLeod had transformed from a daring street kid into the leader of a structured, organized criminal enterprise. His influence stretched across Edinburgh, and his reputation had reached near legendary status within the city's underworld. The combination of fear, wealth, and clever use of social media made him appear untouchable, and both allies and rivals treated him with caution. Yet beneath the surface, tension was building. Every bold move brought him closer to confrontation, and every display of confidence carried the risk of exposure. The rise of Cutter had been remarkable, but the very factors that fueled his power also contained the seeds of danger that would soon become unavoidable. As Callum Cutter MacLeod's influence spread across Edinburgh, the pressures of leadership and visibility began to take their toll. Success had brought wealth, territory, and respect, but it had also brought enemies, both known and hidden. Rival gangs, previously cautious, started making bold moves to challenge his dominance. Minor conflicts escalated into violent encounters on the streets, and the city's criminal underworld became a web of tension, suspicion, and looming danger. Every corner, alley, and pub carried the potential for conflict, and Callum quickly learned that maintaining power required constant vigilance. Paranoia grew within the gang itself. Some members, drawn by ambition or greed, began to question Callum's decisions, testing boundaries and seeking opportunities to seize control for themselves. Trust, once the glue holding the group together, became a fragile commodity. Callum's leadership relied on fear, loyalty, and rewards, but the growing tension meant that even those closest to him could be plotting betrayal. The slightest misstep could expose secrets or provide rivals with a fatal advantage. The very success that had made him untouchable also made him a target. The rise in visibility through social media added another layer of danger. Callum's posts, intended to showcase his wealth and influence, were now being monitored by rivals and law enforcement alike. Every tagged location, every boastful video, and every photo with luxury items became a potential liability. Rivals studied his routines, waiting for a chance to strike. Law enforcement began piecing together patterns, attempting to infiltrate the gang or anticipate moves. The digital footprint that had once amplified his reputation now threatened to unravel it, illustrating the precarious balance between fame and vulnerability in the modern criminal world. As tension mounted, confrontations became more frequent and unpredictable. Rival gangs challenged Cutter's control over key territories, ambushing his crew or attempting to disrupt operations. Callum's strategies became more complex, combining intimidation, calculated retaliation, and manipulation of allies to maintain dominance. But even as he responded to external threats, the seeds of internal betrayal continued to grow. A single act of disloyalty could shatter the gang from within, leaving Callum exposed and vulnerable. Despite the dangers, Callum remained bold, projecting confidence and control. His crew followed his lead, executing plans with precision and responding quickly to threats. Yet beneath the surface, fear was palpable. Every member knew that one wrong move could lead to punishment or death. The city itself became a stage for power struggles, with Edinburgh's streets bearing the consequences of escalating violence and constant tension. Residents noticed the change once familiar neighborhoods grew quiet and tense, with people wary of what might happen after dark. By the end of this phase, the gang had solidified its reputation, but at a cost. Cutter's audacity and success had generated enemies everywhere, and paranoia now governed every decision. Trust was fragile, vigilance was constant, and the very visibility that had propelled his rise also made him vulnerable to betrayal. Callum's story had become a precarious dance between power and danger, and the stage was set for a moment of recklessness that would change everything. The rise of Cutter was impressive, but the tension, rivalries, and internal fractures now pointed toward a confrontation that none could avoid. A turning point where ambition and overconfidence could collide with deadly consequences. Callum Cutter MacLeod had always believed he was untouchable. His confidence, fueled by years of successful operations and carefully cultivated fear, gave him a sense of invincibility. He navigated the streets of Edinburgh with authority, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. But in the age of social media, visibility was a double-edged sword, and Callum's growing reliance on it would prove to be his most dangerous mistake. What had once been a tool for intimidation and influence became the beacon that would reveal his location to those waiting to end his reign. It began innocuously. Callum posted a casual photo on his favorite platform, a snapshot of himself outside a popular pub in the city center. The sun was bright, the streets lively, and in the background, his regular haunts, the houses and familiar streets of his territory, were clearly visible. He tagged the location without thinking twice, believing it to be a harmless display of confidence. Yet unknown to him, the post was instantly visible to friends, followers, and enemies alike. Rivals who had been tracking him for months now had an exact fix on his whereabouts. Every detail of the image, the angle, the background, the time of day, provided critical intelligence. Within hours, rival gang members began moving. The post acted like a map, revealing the perfect opportunity for a strike. Callum's usual network of informants and loyal crew members were either compromised or unaware of the incoming threat. His overconfidence had blinded him to the fact that social media, while amplifying his reputation, also left him exposed. The streets he knew so well, the alleys and corners he had mastered, suddenly became traps. A lifetime of experience and tactical knowledge meant little when his own location was broadcasted to those who wanted him dead. The consequences of the post were immediate. A rival faction, previously planning smaller-scale disruptions, organized a coordinated plan to eliminate Callum. Every movement he made could be anticipated. His escape routes, previously secret, were now predictable. The post, which had been intended as a symbol of power, had become a digital signature marking him for death. Cutter's usual confidence faltered as he realized the severity of his mistake. The same visibility that had allowed him to dominate social media and intimidate rivals had turned against him in a matter of hours. Despite the danger, Callum attempted to maintain control. He moved cautiously through familiar streets, changing routes and trying to anticipate ambushes. Yet the rival gang's knowledge of his habits and location made every decision critical. Each step became a calculated risk, and the sense of invincibility that had carried him through countless conflicts was replaced by a cold, creeping fear. His empire, built on reputation and audacity, now hung by a thread, and the digital mistake he had underestimated could not be undone. By the end of this day, it became clear that social media, once his tool for dominance, had set the stage for his downfall. Callum Cutter MacLeod had made a single, seemingly small error that would have catastrophic consequences. His post had turned the streets of Edinburgh into a hunting ground, and his enemies were ready to strike with precision. What had begun as a display of bravado now marked the beginning of a deadly chain of events that would end his life and serve as a stark warning. In the modern criminal underworld, visibility can be as lethal as any rival. Rival gangs in Edinburgh had been watching Callum Cutter MacLeod for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The moment he posted his location online, they recognized a chance that could not be ignored. What had once been a subtle game of cat and mouse escalated into a fully coordinated plan for his elimination. Leaders of the rival faction convened in secret, mapping out the streets, timing every movement, and positioning their members with precision. The plan was calculated, ruthless, and designed to leave no room for error. Callum, unaware of the full extent of the danger, continued his usual routines, relying on his instincts and street experience to navigate the city. But the rival gang had studied him closely. They knew his favorite pubs, his walking routes, and the safe houses he frequently visited. Every alley he trusted, every shortcut he believed gave him an advantage, was now a potential trap. The post he had made, meant to project power and confidence, had inadvertently broadcasted his movements in real time. What had seemed like a harmless act of bravado became the blueprint for a deadly assault. As the day progressed, tension in the city's criminal underworld grew. Rival gang members took their positions silently, blending into the streets as ordinary pedestrians, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Inside Callum's crew, unease began to spread. Some members noticed suspicious activity but hesitated to act, fearing mistakes could provoke immediate violence. Callum himself remained confident outwardly, masking a creeping sense of unease that came from years of navigating threats. The streets of Edinburgh, once familiar and under his control, had transformed into a maze of uncertainty. The trap began to take shape as the gang closed in around him. Every route Callum might take to escape was monitored. Surveillance of the area ensured that reinforcements from his own crew could be intercepted. The rival gang's timing was impeccable. They moved like a well-oiled machine, coordinating their positions and awaiting the signal that would trigger the final strike. Callum's usual strategies for evasion and counterattack were rendered ineffective by the rival's preparation. His instincts, honed over years of survival, faced a challenge unlike anything he had encountered before. Despite his awareness of potential danger, Callum made critical miscalculations. He underestimated the speed and efficiency with which the rival gang could mobilize. Confidence, which had been the foundation of his rise, now contributed to a dangerous overestimation of his own control over the situation. Each step he took through the city streets brought him closer to the ambush, and each familiar landmark now carried the shadow of imminent violence. The tension was palpable, with every moment stretching into an eternity as the trap tightened around him. By evening, the stage was set. The rival gang, fully prepared and strategically positioned, awaited the precise moment to strike. Callum's world, built on audacity, loyalty, and visibility, had collapsed into a perilous reality where every choice was life or death. The streets that had once been his domain had become a hunting ground. The carefully orchestrated plan by his enemies ensured that there would be no escape, no sudden twist of fate to save him. The boldness that had defined his life now stood as a silent witness to the danger he had underestimated, preparing the way for the confrontation that would change everything. Navigate the dangerous streets of Edinburgh with confidence and precision. But on this fateful night, even his years of experience could not overcome the meticulous planning of his rivals. The alleys and streets that had once been familiar paths now twisted into a trap, each turn carefully monitored. His usual escape routes were blocked, his crew intercepted, and every opportunity to evade danger eliminated. For the first time, Cutter faced a situation where his reputation and skill could not save him. As he moved through the city, a creeping sense of unease replaced the boldness that had defined him. He noticed subtle signs that something was wrong: shadows in windows, figures lingering too long near street corners, and the absence of his trusted lookouts. The post he had made earlier in the day, meant as a display of power, had revealed everything. Rivals had studied it, memorized every detail, and positioned themselves to exploit the smallest opening. Callum realized too late that his visibility had made him vulnerable in ways he had never imagined. The narrowing streets of Edinburgh became a corridor of tension and fear. Cutter tried to change direction, attempting to backtrack and escape, but the ambush had been perfectly timed. Rival gang members strategically placed along the route were ready to close in. His crew, usually a source of strength and backup, had been neutralized or scattered. The city he had controlled with audacity now seemed like a cage, closing in with each step he took. Every familiar landmark felt ominous. Every turn a potential point of no return. Callum's mind raced, analyzing possibilities, searching for an escape that no longer existed. Years of experience in the criminal underworld had taught him to anticipate threats, but this was a confrontation unlike any he had faced. The rivals were coordinated, patient, and ruthless. They had studied him, exploited his habits, and used his confidence against him. His usual strategy of intimidation and surprise, which had allowed him to dominate the streets, now offered no protection. The trap had been laid with precision, leaving him exposed and cornered. As he approached the final section of the alley, Cutter could feel the inevitability of the situation pressing down. The rival gang had orchestrated every detail, ensuring that he could not escape. Even the smallest misstep would seal his fate. His instincts screamed for action, but every path led to confrontation. Fear, previously absent in his bold demeanor, now surged as a stark reality he could not avoid. The streets of Edinburgh, once his domain, had become a stage for his downfall. By the time he realized the full scope of the ambush, it was too late. The rivals moved with lethal precision, surrounding him from every angle. The years of power, influence, and audacity could not counteract the carefully executed plan. Cutter's cornered position left him with no options, and the reality of his impending fate set in. The confidence that had fueled his rise had blinded him to the consequences of visibility, and the trap that had been laid was inescapable. The stage was set for the final act, a brutal conclusion to a rise built on ambition, risk, and audacity, leaving only one outcome: the execution that had been planned the moment he revealed himself. The moment that Callum Cutter MacLeod had feared, yet never fully anticipated, arrived with ruthless precision. Cornered in a narrow, dimly lit alleyway of Edinburgh, he faced the culmination of months of planning by his rivals. The shadows seemed to close in from all sides. His once familiar surroundings transformed into a trap from which there was no escape. The rival gang had studied his movements, his habits, and even his social media activity, exploiting every detail to ensure that Cutter would be unable to evade them. The same streets he had once controlled with audacity now served as the stage for his final moments. The attack began swiftly. Rival members emerged from hidden positions, moving with coordinated precision, leaving no gaps in their strategy. Callum attempted to fight back, relying on the instincts and reflexes that had kept him alive in countless skirmishes. But the sheer planning and numerical advantage of his attackers rendered resistance futile. Each step he took was anticipated, each attempt to retreat blocked by figures positioned perfectly along the narrow alley. The noise of the city, normally a comforting background, became a tense, echoing witness to the violent encounter unfolding. Cutter's crew, normally loyal and ready to intervene, had been neutralized or scattered before the confrontation, leaving him isolated. The sense of invincibility that had carried him through so many dangerous situations evaporated in the cold reality of the trap. The rivals moved like a single entity, a force born of coordination and determination, with the sole purpose of ending his reign. Callum's confidence, built over years of bold decisions and fearless displays, could not protect him from the meticulously executed assault. In the moments leading to the execution, the alleyway became a crucible of tension and fear. Callum understood the finality of the situation. There would be no escape, no last-minute twist to save him. The planning that had enabled him to rise to power was now mirrored in the precision of those determined to end him. His social media post, which had once showcased his audacity and influence, now marked him for death in the modern criminal underworld. Each rival's movement, each calculated step, reminded him that visibility in the digital age could be fatal. The attack was brief but decisive. Cutter was overwhelmed, unable to counter the coordinated strike. The execution was carried out with cold efficiency, leaving no room for survival. The narrow alley, the silent witnesses of buildings and streetlights, bore witness to the violent culmination of ambition, pride, and miscalculated audacity. The fear he had once instilled in others now surrounded him entirely. A reversal of fortune as final as it was inevitable. News of Callum's execution spread quickly through Edinburgh's underworld. The city streets, once dominated by his bold presence, grew tense and quiet in the aftermath. Rival gangs took note of the precision and ruthlessness with which the attack had been carried out, while law enforcement began to piece together the events that led to his death. Cutter's audacity, which had propelled him to the top, ultimately contributed to his downfall. His story became a stark warning. In the modern era, even the boldest criminals are vulnerable when visibility and door can intersect with meticulous planning by rivals. By the end, the fall of Callum Cutter MacLeod was complete. His rise, dominance, and execution highlighted the brutal realities of gang life, where power can be fleeting and a single mistake can have deadly consequences. The streets of Edinburgh, once under his shadow, slowly reclaimed a tense quiet, leaving behind the chilling lesson that in the world of crime, no one is untouchable. The streets of Edinburgh were never quite the same after the death of Callum Cutter MacLeod. His rise and sudden fall left a mark on the city, particularly in the neighborhoods where his influence had been strongest. For years, residents had lived under a mix of fear and grudging respect, aware that Cutter and his crew controlled the streets with an unspoken authority. Now, with his execution, that balance was abruptly disrupted, leaving the criminal underworld scrambling to fill the power vacuum. Rival gangs moved quickly, attempting to claim territories that had once been untouchable, and the sense of order that Cutter had imposed collapsed almost overnight. The impact on the community was profound. Shops and local businesses that had paid for protection or navigated the gangs' rules now faced uncertainty. Fear remained, though it was no longer tied to one figure. It had diffused across the city in unpredictable ways. Residents spoke quietly about the events, passing on warnings to the younger generation about the dangers of ambition and visibility in a life of crime. Parents, educators, and community leaders used Cutter's story as a cautionary tale, highlighting how audacity and social media exposure could lead to irreversible consequences. The lessons were harsh but undeniable. In the criminal world, even a single mistake could be fatal. Law enforcement used the aftermath of Cutter's death to strengthen their presence in the neighborhoods that had once been dominated by his gang. Police patrols increased, and investigations into the rival factions intensified. While some of the gang's former associates were arrested, others went underground, attempting to escape the shadow of Cutter's legacy. The city itself became a living lesson in the dangers of organized crime, and law enforcement agencies studied the events closely, analyzing both the rise and the fall to prevent similar situations in the future. For those who had been part of Cutter's inner circle, life changed drastically. The loyalty and fear that had kept the gang intact dissolved quickly under pressure from rival factions and law enforcement scrutiny. Some members attempted to reintegrate into society, but the notoriety of their association made normal life difficult. Others continued down paths of violence, determined to survive in a world that no longer had a clear leader. The memory of Cutter's audacity and ultimate downfall loomed over them, a constant reminder of how quickly power can be stripped away when visibility and overconfidence collide with meticulous planning by enemies. Cutter's story became a subject of discussion, not just in Edinburgh, but across the UK. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and online forums dissected his rise and execution, fascinated by the speed with which his life had spiraled from dominance to death. Social media, which had once amplified his reputation, was now cited as a tool that had facilitated his downfall, underscoring the modern realities of criminal visibility. His tale became both legend and warning, a story repeated in cautionary tones by those who studied the underworld, and a grim narrative for young people tempted by the allure of fast power and money. Ultimately, the legacy of Callum Cutter MacLeod was one of lessons carved in blood and caution. His life illustrated the fleeting nature of criminal power, the dangers of overconfidence, and the inescapable consequences of a single mistake. The streets of Edinburgh eventually regained a measure of calm, though the memory of Cutter and his fatal error remained etched into the city's consciousness. Ambition, fear, and audacity had collided in a deadly moment, leaving a story that would be remembered long after the alleys and streets had reclaimed their quiet. The rise and fall of Cutter served as a chilling reminder. In the world of crime, no one is untouchable, and every choice carries the weight of potential consequences.